Okay, everyone, let's make a start. Welcome to WELL Midwest Making Connections webinar event, Strategies for Delivering Online Professional Development to Rural Educators. I'm Jason Narlock, researcher here at WELL Midwest. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. I want to provide a brief introduction. We have been having some technical difficulties. I do apologize. We're going to switch around the agenda just slightly. Simone White from Monash University will be speaking first, followed by Evan Abbey, and then our keynote speaker will follow. I want to give a brief overview of WELL Midwest and our work, and then hand it over to Simone. WELL Midwest is part of 10 regional education laboratories that are funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. Based here in the Chicago area, WELL Midwest serves the educational needs of Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin, and we're administered by the American Institutes for Research. Our charge is to improve academic outcomes for students by doing the following: helping states, school districts, and schools systematically use data, conducting and supporting high-quality research and evaluation, and promoting evidence-based decision-making. In other words, WELL Midwest helps educators and policymakers expand their knowledge and understanding of research and its value to decision-making and education reform. Our work operates primarily through our research alliances. These are groups of practitioners, policymakers, and other education stakeholders interested in working together to address shared problems of practice. WELL Midwest works with alliance members to help carry out and develop these research agendas. We have 10 alliances at the moment. The most important alliance for today is our Rural Research Alliance, where this webinar is coming out of. As I just mentioned, our goal here at WELL Midwest is to help stakeholders understand both the current state of education research as well as its value in decision-making and education reform. To that end, our Making Connections series, which includes our webinar this afternoon, is critical in this regard. These events bring together researchers, policymakers, and practitioners to engage in a collaborative discussion on education issues. The events themselves are held in person, online, and also on television in partnership with Midwest Regional Public Television stations. We have additional resources, which I'm afraid are not on these slides, that can be found on our website. We also have on the website contacts for our Rural Alliance lead that we can also pass along. So this afternoon we'd like to share the latest information, hopefully start a conversation on strategies for developing professional development opportunities to educators in rural areas. Accessing professional development has been a persistent challenge for educators in rural districts. Sparse populations and vast landscapes, diverse curricular needs, and limited teaching resources often place rural educators at a comparative disadvantage to their urban and suburban counterparts when seeking to gain additional skills in the classroom. One promising evidence-based strategy for delivering effective professional development to teachers in rural areas is through various online virtual technologies. Utilizing web-based platforms and tapping into a diverse range of pedagogical models, from game-based learning to blended delivery, researchers and practitioners have been developing increasingly sophisticated tools and products that educators can leverage to overcome some of the historical barriers to professional development in rural areas. Now, the United States has been instrumental in the development of online professional development applications for rural educators, but as we'll hear in the next speaker, this is by no means alone. We're by no means alone here in the United States. In a number of countries like Australia, policymakers and practitioners are developing strategies to overcome similar obstacles to rural professional development, and many of these results, we think, can be informative to how we view rural professional development here in the United States. So with that said, I want to turn it over to one of our panelist speakers, Dr. Simone White from Monash University.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of the research and the scholarly work that's been done in Australia in terms of best preparing teachers for rural communities. As I've been introduced, my name is Simone White, and you'll see on the PowerPoint there my email. should you wish to contact me after this presentation. So I'll just click. Okay. You'll see there, I thought I'd just introduce myself a little bit further so you know why this work has been a bit of a lifelong interest of mine. As a child, I grew up, my father was an insurance worker, a farmer, and so I grew up in a range of rural and regional settings. In Australia, mostly that meant quite a far distance away from a metropolitan city, mostly in farming communities, mostly cattle or dairy or wheat, those types of communities. And I moved from town to town with my family. I went to a range of different types of schools, but a lot of them were small schools and multi-age and multi-stage. So my own experiences as a child was being taught in a range of rural settings, rural communities. And for a period of time, because I did move so much, sometimes I needed to be homeschooled as well. They were only very small. I was able to move to a town, a reasonably, what we call probably a regional town, in my later high school years. And I was wanting to be a teacher, and I was very fortunate that we had higher education opportunities for tertiary education in my actual community. That's quite rare in Australia for rural kids. Majority of rural children, rural students have to leave their homes to go to university. And unlike my understanding of this is a cultural practice in the States, in Australia it isn't a normal cultural practice, so that it would be more likely that students would stay at home and study and go to university. Some students obviously do go into residential places in the university setting, but it's not as common, and it's also expensive. So I was very lucky to have an opportunity to go to a teacher's college in those days and to become a teacher. I taught in a range of rural schools as well, and obviously later on I also went into some city schools. Then I became a teacher educator, someone who works at a university and teaches teachers, so to speak. And I really reflected back on my own experiences as a child, my own experiences as a student at a rural regional university, and as a teacher working in rural schools. And a lot of my work since then has been on how to best prepare teachers for rural settings so that rural kids, rural students, get the best outcomes. So that's just a little bit about myself and my own experiences and why I'm passionate about this particular work. So I'll give you the context of the Australian setting, and as I understand, there are similarities with colleagues obviously in the United States, but also in Canada, in England, and interestingly also in the Asia-Pacific countries as well. So in Australia, attracting and retaining teachers for rural, regional and remote schools is still a major sustainability and quality issue. We have what is often called a staffing churn. So we have teachers who will go into rural settings, but they will not stay very long. They might only stay a couple of months. They might stay a year, but it can be not often longer than maybe 3 years. Or then they stay too long, if you know what I mean. They stay forever in the same school. So we've got an issue in terms of attracting and retaining teachers in terms of getting that balance right of attracting and retaining. But interestingly in Australia, we also have an issue of an overabundance of teachers. So we're producing primary and secondary prepared teachers, but they're not going to where the needs are, which is rural, regional and remote. So my argument is that producing more teachers is not the answer. So we actually have to do something dramatically different in the ways in which we're best preparing teachers for rural, regional, remote contexts. And it's a model that I've been developing in ways of a partnership model. So that's the state of play. And as I said, it's, as I understand it, has similarities with colleagues hopefully listening to this presentation. So, what can universities, schools, and I include rural communities because a lot of the work that I've been doing is that rural communities have a very powerful effect on the attraction and retention of beginning teachers and new teachers. So what do those three groups, universities, schools and communities do different, can they do differently and together to recruit and retain teachers? Well, one of the first things I think that is needed is a reconceptualisation of the ways in which we best prepare our teachers and support our teachers in rural schools as well. You'll see on this slide 3 photographs, and this is it's not too far from me, a couple of hours from where I'm currently located at the moment. So you'll see a typical rural streetscape there in the top left side of the photograph, the main town, so to speak. You'll see in the middle, this is a dairy community. So the school is actually in the middle there, behind those trees, and it services a particular rural regional community, dairy community. Kids are coming in from a range of farms. It could be an hour on the bus to get to school. And on the right, you'll see the same school there. This is actually just outside the classroom. It's a multi-age, multi-stage classroom. And the majority of the children, as they are coming off the farm, the rural leaves the shoes have to go outside the door before they come into the classroom. And so you'll have the lives of dairy kids there. I think these 3 photographs reflect the ways in which we need to reconceptualise the ways of preparing teachers and supporting teachers. Teachers need to be not only classroom ready, but also school ready and community ready. And they need to be supported across those 3 aspects as well in terms of attraction and retention of teachers and professional learning of teachers. So the teachers don't just work in isolation. They work within a school and they work within a broader community. And those layers, as such, if you think of it from a sort of an onion moving out, classroom, school, community, are very important. All 3 have to be attended to. At the moment, many of our teacher education courses, programs, mostly focus on classroom readiness, behaviour management, curriculum aspects. Now, I'm not saying those aspects are not important, but what I am saying is that being prepared to teach across grades, across levels, work with small teams of teachers. Often in a rural regional setting, you have a smaller school staffing system. You're more likely to have opportunities for leadership. In the Australian context, you do far earlier in your career than if you went to a metropolitan school. You have higher expectations in terms of being a leader within the community, and you are very visible in the community, as you can imagine. Walking the street to the left there as a new teacher. Everybody knows you, knows your business, what you're doing. And we need to attend to all 3 aspects. So that's the first area I wanted to touch on, is that we need to actually reconceptualise the way, reframe the way we think about teacher preparation, teacher induction, teacher professional learning. As part of the work that I've been doing, my argument has been that teacher education is key to staff in rural schools. And if teacher education is key in terms of the ways we best prepare our teachers, then teacher educators, people who are teaching teachers, they include school-based teacher educators, those who work alongside pre-service teachers in the classrooms and in the schools. They include university-based teacher educators, those who are teaching at the university. And my argument is as well, inconsistent with that conceptualisation model, community-based teacher educators. And they are an important group that we're just starting to explore further in studies that I'm doing here in Australia. So those 3 groups need professional learning. Okay, so I'll have to come back school-based, university-based and community-based. So in an effort to do that, I was successful in what we call an Australian Learning and Teaching Council grant. It's a national grant, 250,000 Australian dollars. To actually, it was a 2-year project. We looked at a number of strategies, resources to best equip teacher educators in their own professional learning so that they could be then in turn best preparing future teachers. So you'll see there, just to grab a screenshot of the RTEC. So it's Renewing Rural and Regional Teacher Education Curriculum website. It's free, it's public, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can go onto that website and you can see a range of resources, both readings as well as practical activities. So just there on the screen you'll see a number of modules were designed. For example, experiencing rurality. So that's really best preparing people to understand what does rurality mean? What does it look like? What is it, in terms of thinking about it? And then if you click on that link, it'll take you to a range of resources and activities. Likewise, you'll see each of the different modules are set out there. In one of the modules, Module 6, professional experience. So when you're preparing to be a teacher, you have what we call a practicum component, so you're going out into a school community to learn to be a teacher. And that particular module unpacks a whole range of ways in which all students, no matter where they're based, in terms of in a regional setting or within a metropolitan setting, can learn about the rural, regional, remote places. So you'll see field trip scenarios, you have with video links to get speakers talking about their experiences in rural schools, etc. So I'm hoping that, and one of the reasons I was really excited to have this opportunity to talk to people who are interested in rural education across the world, is that this can also be a resource that can be developed and added to. And I've got further funding this year to add more to this particular resource and develop a social media tool as such to gather professional learning. So I'd be more than happy for people to have a look at the website. If you see any gaps or any other ideas or strategies that you'd like to add and talk to me about, that would be terrific. All right, so I do hope that you go and have a chance to have a look at that. I thought that I would share with you just a couple of different aspects of different projects that I've been working in. So you've heard about the conceptual model, so that's been a fair bit of work around reconceptualizing teacher preparation. Then you've heard about the RTEC project, which was developing an online resource for professional learning of teacher educators. And another aspect that myself and a number of colleagues have been working on is looking at successful case studies of schools that were going against the trend in terms of recruiting and retaining teachers. So this project is what we call the Terra Nova project, Teacher Education for Rural Regional Australia. It was led by Professor Joanne Reid, who is a colleague at Charles Sturt University, and there were 6 researchers in this particular project. So what we did, as you just see, I think, okay, there is a blank screen, and that's okay. This particular screen, I'll just talk you through what it has. It's a picture of Australia, and it has across the little dots where the case studies were. So I'll skip across that one now. You have a picture screen to turn on there. What we did was we put out a national radio announcement. We called for schools that were going against this trend in terms of retaining recruiting teachers, and they had to meet the criteria of having beginning teachers for more than 3 years within their school, and a good balance between beginning and experienced teachers, and we looked at 50 nominations, and then we selected 20 of those schools. And they were based right across Australia, so from Western Australia to the top of Australia, Queensland, down to where I am in Victoria, from all our states and territories. And as researchers, we went into the communities, we stayed in the communities for a period of time. We interviewed anybody within the community who wanted to be interviewed to look at, well, what were the strategies that this particular community and school were doing to actually recruit and retain teachers. It was a 3-year study, and I thought I'd share with you just some of the findings. So, in a nutshell, we found that these schools had similarities, even though they were very different in size, location, economy. There were schools from a low socioeconomic area, there were schools from more successful traditional sort of wheat belt communities, as I said, very small communities. It was quite diverse, but they all had these things in common. They, as a group, collective group within the school and the community, invested in people and partnerships. And I'll come to partnerships in a bit more. They invested in, this often was led by the school principal. It was what we call social profit. It was a social entrepreneurial behaviour that existed in all of the characteristic traits and had been a professional learning development of many of the principals. And they were very, very good at networking and resourcing for their schools and for their communities. And an investment in place in almost every single of the case studies the community had rallied around to invest in a particular aspect of their community that would make it more attractive for people to come. And so it did, and then successful success. So these were what we call investing in, with the 3 aspects. So just to unpack this a little bit further, investing in people, well, it does sound fairly common sense, but let's have a little look at what that actually means. It was often, I'll just say this here, it was often a school principal or a significant leader in the school and or community who demonstrated both a social and creative entrepreneurial skills to attract whatever resources, human, technical, economic or physical, that might be necessary to sustain and support staff and beyond. They were able to link networks, not just within the community, but from broader afield, so another community. There was a very good culture of mentoring within all of these schools, but it was holistic mentoring. So it often involved mentoring within the community as well, within the school and within, obviously, the classroom. So again, it's back to that conceptual model that I shared with you at the beginning of this presentation, that this investment of the whole person. The whole person, and often a recognition that this person came with family, or they came with a history, they came with particular skills and strengths, and they were acknowledged, valued and supported. So it wasn't as if this person was just, oh, here's this new teacher. It was, here's this new person who brings into this community a whole wealth of knowledge, experience, expertise, strength, and let's look at how we can work with them in a holistic way, support them, and make them feel like they can really contribute very early on in their careers as beginning teachers. So it was all of the schools, we all commented as researchers, we wanted to be part of that school. That's the way that they made you feel. And they were very interested in us. And that was another interesting thing, that we found ourselves as researchers being connected into their school, and then with conversations around, okay, so what can we do? Can we build up a university partnership? Can this research impact our community? As a result of these conversations, actually, as researchers, we all decided that our research, our case studies, must be produced for the school community, as well as obviously for the Australian government, who has paid for the research as such. So as a consequence, we have 20 case studies that were written in a particular plain language for each school, and we delivered it to a school for them to then celebrate with their community. And that came from the groups, the schools themselves, and then obviously from us as researchers, recognising that our research was going to further build their success. I hope that all makes sense. Partnerships, as I said, this networking that existed between the classroom, schools, obviously, and the community. Often there was some form of partnership with the university. They had very interesting pre-service teacher practicum arrangements that they had tried to build up the next generation of teachers coming into their schools, into their communities. They all took the view that if we can participate in teacher preparation, if we can help them, these new people see that they can have a successful rural career, then they're more likely to come back and work with us, or come back, even if it doesn't come to our school, to another school that's a rural school. So these forms of partnerships were quite, they were a belief, I think, in terms of the future-proofing of rural workforce. And it wasn't done in a selfish way, as in, oh, this is just for our school. It was done in a collective way for all rural schools. So again, that was another common trait that we found within our case study schools. This is an interesting, again, this notion of social profit. Obviously, there was communities who had invested in housing for teachers. This became an issue, and it is an issue still in Australia, settings in rural, regional, remote contexts, of actually getting sufficient housing for professionals moving into rural communities. So in some of the case studies, the community had rallied around to actually build, almost, which was built actually, a teacher housing area. And so that was successful. This particular YouTube, and I would encourage you to follow that. One of the communities said, through their shire, and they got together with the school, there was a number of schools in that particular community in there, and the shire, and they said, we're a great community, but nobody knows about us. What can we do? And how can we attract and retain new professionals? And obviously teachers were part of that. They decided to create their own film scripts, and they asked the locals, they asked the people in the community to tell their stories on film about why they came to the town and what they think are the benefits of the town. And those YouTube, those clips are on the YouTube. Now, it sort of became like a sort of a marketing tool, I suppose, for their town. And they came up with a slogan of naturally rich. And they started to generate sort of more of a media selling as such. They were sort of marketing their whole town, and there was a couple of radio and television announcements using these clips. And they said it was very successful in rallying their own town in terms of, which is a really great place to be, and also was successful in recruiting and retaining teachers and other professionals into the community by hearing just the stories of local people. A lot of the communities were obviously investing in their own towns, and I think that media example is another example of investing in themselves. This was a story of a town that used to be a rural timber mill town, or sort of a logging town, and the logging dried up, and they had to reinvent themselves. And what we found in all the 20 case studies actually was some form of decline had occurred, and then the community had considered, well, what next? This particular, one of the towns, that was this particular one, the rural timber mill town, reinvented itself. They found that they had a similar climate to southern France. It was a microclimate, and they have now decided to grow truffles. So they looked at other towns or other areas within the weather and conditions, what else could they produce, and came up with truffles, and now really sort of taking off in that particular area. So they recognise that they can't sort of sustain the tools if they don't have the people and the employment to do so. So it's sort of, that's what the message is there. It's sort of got to be a whole of community approach. Mentoring again has come up. Community-based mentors. Now, again, this is a group that I was starting to talk to you a little bit about earlier, community-based teacher educators. In particular, in Australian setting, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education officers who do work sometimes in the school but are very instrumental in the community. But this is a group that are very, very important in bringing or recruiting and retaining and the professional learning of our new teachers within rural, regional, remote, well, within all contexts really within Australia, but for the purposes of today, we're just focusing on rural, regional, remote. So community-based people who are taking on mentoring as well. Okay. So we're getting towards the end here of my presentation before we move on to the next person. These are some of the overall findings of those 20 case studies. I won't read them out to you. I'm hoping that you can just have a look through those. I hope the message that I'm trying to convey is it was a school community effort. It was a leader, whether it was in the school or within the community, who had a clear vision, outward looking, not inward looking, very important. Very powerful networking, and as I said, this is not about money networking, this is about resources, people, those sorts of connections. It's sort of social capital and cultural capital, but it was definitely people who were able to link and who acknowledged within people, okay, you come with particular strengths, let's build on that. With many of our pre-service, or many of our beginning teachers, they are seen at the bottom of the rung. They're sort of seen as, okay, well, you've got a lot to learn now. But all of these schools and principals and communities saw not always young people, but beginning teachers as, really offering a whole range of skills and strengths. And so they harnessed that, acknowledged that, valued that, and gave those people a really great opportunity. And as a result, those teachers wanted to stay, and they wanted to get involved. Professional learning opportunities, some really interesting, again, connecting schools and communities. There's opportunities to go and visit other communities, other schools, both face-to-face, but also using technology. So there was lots of different strategies that I hope are interesting to you and that you can think about in terms of your working with schools and within the community. Well, I think that's brought me to the end of my presentation. As I said, my email is there, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from you. Just to quickly mention, I talked to you about the Terra Nova project, the publication, and you can write to me if you'd like to know more about that particular Australian Research Council funded project. We've got the website for the ARTEC, and I'm working at the moment with a colleague from Canada, Professor Michael Corbett. He and I are co-editing a book on how to best work with rural communities or research with rural communities. The lessons I've learned from, as I said, going into those communities, working with people, being a very visible researcher yourself when you go into a rural community, and big stories around that. So that'll be launched soon, and hopefully I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that particular project. So thank you very much, everybody. More about both the schools and the teacher education. If not, Jason, don't worry, I can talk about this, no problems. I just want to double check. Do you want to switch to the other one?
If you could carry on with this one, it might be helpful, but please do add any additional information you think would be helpful, Simone.
Okay, all right. So basically my argument is that teacher education has to do something different as such for the, oh my goodness, here we go. Okay, so what I've been involved in Australia is a large, I'm just going to follow the screen that you've got in front of you, a large Australian Learning and Teaching Council funded project aimed at teacher educators. So these are both university-based teacher educators as well as school-based teacher educators to improve teacher education. So our system has been very much a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't matter where the teacher's going to go, the teacher preparation is the same. So my argument has been we actually have to do something differently in teacher education curriculum. We have to design units of study. We have to design resources that pre-service teachers and in-service teachers can use. So I applied for a fund, a large Australian fund, and this is what you'll see on your screen. I've just received more funding for this particular work. I hope I'll show you, oh, yes, I'll move this along here. Yes, that's the one. That I'm working on at the moment with professional learning tools. And as we're talking about today, trying to use social media and technology to ensure the professional development of teacher educators. Oh, that was a nice picture there. Yep. Okay. So there's some photos of some of the schools and communities in which I've gone into. On the left-hand side, it's a typical rural community, what we call a one sort of street town. As a teacher, for many of you who are teachers yourselves, you'll know that you're highly visible when you're in a community. If you choose to work in a rural community, you know that your business, your life outside, is highly visible. And preparing teachers for that fact, for especially if they haven't lived in a rural community themselves in Australia, often they haven't, they need to have that understanding. The picture in the middle, you'll see that in the middle of those trees there is one of our schools. It's in our dairy. It's one of our dairy communities, and really understanding this is a small school. I think there were 7 teachers in the school, and to understand that the work of a teacher is very much a part of the working as a whole school. You know, if one teacher is needing to go, you know, somewhere else for the day, then the other teachers need to rally around and pick up the classroom work. And the final photograph is some of our beautiful students' shoes. The policy is that they have to leave their shoes outside the classroom. Again, these are some of our dairy kids who come off the farms and who've had a very long day already before they even start their day. So a lot of my work is around what I call preparing teachers to be classroom ready, school ready, and community ready. And our teacher education programs need to be the same. So it can't just be a focus on classroom readiness. It needs to be a focus on school and community readiness. Okay. So the next, one back, thank you. The next slide is just briefly the conceptual framework there. So if we, you know, using that terminology, classroom ready, school ready, community ready, this sort of conceptual work here, I've been trying to look at, okay, so in the classroom, very influenced by, it's quite interesting, one of your urban educators, the work of Louis Moll, because I have found in Australia, his work has actually links in terms of the teachers better understanding the funds of knowledge or what the students come to school with. For example, those dairy children that in Australian curriculum often they say, oh, well, all classrooms should start at 9 o'clock in the morning with English. Well, for those particular students who have come from a dairy community working already in the morning, been on a long bus ride, actually that's not the first thing that they need when they come to school. So really starting to prepare teachers to better understand what the needs of the students who are coming to the school are, rather than assuming that a one-size-all curriculum fits all. Much more curriculum focused across year levels rather than just one year level. Obviously in the school, working in teams, understanding their role in a rural community environment. And just this last slides there in the communities that you can see, it's based on some of the work they've been doing from a different project on understanding place and a community through the three lens of people, place and profit, economy, geography and demography. So really understanding a place and utilising place when you're, as a teacher, working in a rural community. So that's the sort of conceptual work. I hope I'm going okay. And Jay, can you just tell me if I'm going too slow and you need me to speed up and move along?
I think you're doing just fine.
Okay, thank you. The next slide you'll see, and at the very top, you'll see a website address. This is free and public, open source as such. I really wanted it to be so you can access this website at any time. This website has been designed for mostly teacher educators. So these are mostly people who are in universities. But I have found that a lot of principals or school leaders and teachers have enjoyed looking at the resources and activities that we have designed as well and using them for their professional learning. So as I said, the audience was not teachers when I was developing this. My argument was that it was the teacher educators, the people who were teaching in university who needed to be better equipped to prepare our teachers for rural communities. But as I said, it's been a spin out that there's been more people that have been interested in. What you see across, hopefully you can see the screen grab. You can see, you'll find out about the project, you'll find out about the conceptual work I was just explaining to you. And then you'll find a lot of modules. Now these are modules that can be used in a professional learning way. They try to stimulate conversation. They showcase pictures, excuse me, photographs of rural communities, for example, rural schools. They pose some challenges. We have in there, for example, statistics and demographics. And then we have a lot of our resources in our library. So that is also for people who are interested in research that has already been conducted. We have over 850 resources in there in terms of publications. And you can just access any of those for free, as I said. The second part of the work that I'm doing at the moment, well, besides obviously telling people about the website, is looking at how can we better use tools, just like what we're trying to do today, to get people then, okay, well, what did you do with that resource? Okay, so I can see when people go in, and I know how many people are using the website, but I don't know what people are doing with the activities or with the resources or with the ideas. So I've developed and I'm not really a Facebook user personally, but I have developed a Facebook. The idea will be that people can trial an idea and then talk about it using Facebook. I'm hoping that people will start to connect at some stage as well, face-to-face, through some of these types of opportunities, where people can start to say, oh, I used this, this wasn't very useful in my context, what could be a new resource, or I would suggest this new resource or this idea. So that's the type of community that I'm hoping can be built through this type of an online professional learning resource. Okay. Now, I'm not sure. I'm just going to keep skipping this. Okay. Have I got a bit longer, Jason? Or would you like me to stop?
Please go on. You do have a couple more minutes.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm sorry about this, but I wanted just to touch base on some other project, or one other project that I thought perhaps people might be interested in. So the work I just was sharing with you was focused on higher education or universities and teacher educators and the website. The second work that I thought people might be interested in was in the Australian context. We looked at a study of successful schools that what we called were going against the trend in terms of recruiting and retaining teachers. So we put out a call, expression of interest across our national radio and our media, and we ended up getting more than 50 schools who nominated. the criteria had to be that the teachers had been in the school, new teachers had come and been in the school for longer than 3 years. Because of the geography of Australia, we tried to ensure that we had representation from all our states and territories. And I would just imagine there's a big map of Australia, and I would be showing you exactly the case study. So from our very top of Australia, which is actually our hottest part of the country and quite tropical, all the way across the other side of Australia to the western side, where you've got timber mills and sort of cooler climate and very small schools as well. So if you can imagine the geography, big range of schools. We studied as researchers, and there was a team of us, six of us. We went into all of the schools immersed ourselves into the community, into the school, and we gathered information and evidence around what was going on in these schools and communities that was successful. And so I thought I'd just share with you the findings of that, and I'll just briefly talk about them. We found commonalities across all schools. Interestingly, didn't matter about size. We found that all of them were, each of the successful schools was deeply linked in a positive way with their community. Their community supported the school, and the school supported the community. So it was a symbiotic type relationship, and the community worked hard to help in the recruitment and retention process. Now this is where we have differentiation, but we had many communities had successfully through their local councils had worked to welcome the new teachers. They had provided induction into the community, so remember that community ready. They helped them in terms of coming in, the orientation, feeling welcomed, and actually had formal mentoring packages that community members participated in. In the Australian context, one of our least represented groups in terms of opportunities in schooling and higher education is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And in some of our successful schools, we found that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community elders and members were successfully helping in the process of induction and welcoming into community. We felt that was that's an area we would really like to continue to build on and focus on in ways in which community members can actively participate in the education of teachers, in professional learning of teachers, coming back to that work of Louis Moll Funds of Learning. Funds of knowledge, and I think that's a really interesting work. I hope that people will find that as well. In terms of other things that you might find interesting and perhaps synergies in your work, we found that the successful schools invested in people and partnerships, invested in what we called social profit. So if you remember that little triangle, you know, the economy, geography, and demography, well, these emerged again in terms of the ways in which the schools and the community work together. So in terms of people, demography, in terms of economy, it wasn't as in making financial profit, but social profit, investing in the well-being of the school and the community, and investing in place, which is in geography. We found the school leader significant in every single case. We even were able to identify, and I can perhaps another time or share with you some of the research around the importance of the school leader. So in our situation we call them a principal or an executive leader, and they were often people who exhibited particular, what we called social entrepreneurial skills. They were people who naturally sought to resource and network and link into their school. So even if you have a really small school in a fairly remote context, they had links, if you mapped them, into universities that might have been set into far away, into other professional associations that were quite lobbying and policy and working on policy, to other principals that they were connected with, and all of that was about their school and their community. So lots more to be said around the types of school leaders, and I think another area of interest would be the professional learning and development of such school leaders, because they are also key in keeping quality staff, in recruiting quality staff, and in retaining quality staff. A lot of the successful schools had ventured into interesting partnerships with local schools, so they were starting to form clusters, and that enabled the teachers who might be in young and fairly isolated to somehow then connect with others. So that professional learning was happening through the principal forming clusters with their other local regional schools. And they didn't have to be close by. As I said, they could be an hour and a half away. In Australia, you could do 2 hours to get to a professional development if you're driving. But obviously this is a different model where you're trying to network and cluster. And there's been a lot more use of technology in the same way, and I'm sorry I can't share that with you at the moment. Let me see what else. I'm just looking through this presentation that I had. I think that they might be enough for now, Jason. And just in conclusion, I suppose, I'll just give you the overall findings of some of the work in terms of these successful schools. They were able to develop and market themselves in terms of telling other people about it. Innovative school community partnerships. They had a commitment to pre-service teacher education. They thought that if they connected to a university and worked with the university to help shape the future teachers, that was interesting, successful work. They did a lot to build up their community, and the community built up them. They had a whole school community plan, for example. There was a culture of innovation and reward in terms of, it didn't have to be financial reward, but in terms of the sense of achievement. Innovative, creative and socially entrepreneurial people, resourceful, and I think that will be it. I hope, I'm sorry, it's always hard when you can't see your audience, but I hope that that's been interesting to people, and I can see 1 or 2 people have now put something into the chat, and I'll just sit now and listen to everybody else. Jason, back to you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Simone. It was really great to get that perspective, the Australian perspective on a common issue. We do have a few minutes for questions. I encourage the audience to type in the text box any questions that they may have. So perhaps we could start with the one that's right up at the moment. So one participant is wondering if there are any factors that were prevalent in areas where there was high turnover. And I guess I'll take chairperson's privileges and follow up on that. I was also wondering what the response from the communities were when you start to get high turnover in teachers.
So I can see Laura's question. There's a lot of literature that you'll find in that website that I showed you, and we do an overview of the major issues. So you'll see that as well. So I encourage people to go back into that website and have a look. But the majority of the reasons why tend to be that our students, our pre-service teachers, have a lot of them have not experienced rural, regional and remote. Our teachers tend to come from our inner suburban areas. So for them, it's actually the fact that they've not experienced rural, regional, remote context, and they're just not prepared. So that's why this work came about, because they get to the rural community and realise, oh goodness, this is not what I was expecting, and they basically want to leave straight away. So one is trying to address the pre-service teachers' perceptions and understanding of a rural, working in a rural community. So that's one part. The other part was, to do with the school and the community. So, unwelcome, no mentoring, no community supporters at all, divided communities. So where you've got communities who are clearly struggling, racial tensions and things like that. So you've got a community who's struggling and they therefore can't support their school and the school's not supporting them, and so everything's spiralling out of control. And the teachers then come into an environment where they say, I can't do anything in here, so they don't stay. So it seems to be that the keys seem to be, one, we've got to address pre-service teacher education and better prepare our teachers for the richness, the realities, and the challenges of rural, regional, remote work. Schools and communities need to work in harmony and close together. And there are a lot of stages that I could then talk about it, as I said, further. But if you look at the website, it will at least give you some of the literature, the theory, the research in terms, and it will hopefully stimulate some more ideas too and conversations, because I'm keen to hear what people are doing in the States that we can learn, Australians can learn more about as well. I know we have very common, geographic sort of scenarios, and also I think within our Indigenous, sort of our Indigenous issues as well. Now the second part, Jason, I forgot, sorry.
Well, actually, we do need to move on, but thanks very much, Simone. That was really great. We're going to move on to Evan Abbey. Evan, if you are there.
I'm here.
Excellent. So if you don't mind, Evan, we'll move on to you. We think we have sorted out the issue with Chris, so it's a bit backwards in terms of our schedule. But I would like to introduce you to everyone to Evan Abbey. And Evan is going to talk about online professional development in Iowa.
Okay. My name is Evan Abbey. I work for an organization called AEA PD Online. In Iowa, we have 9 regional service units called Area Education Agencies, and they're an intermediary unit to provide services to schools. That includes a lot of things such as special education and media resources and things like that. But one of the services that we provide is professional development. We're not the only entity in town. There's statewide chapters of the teachers unions, the NEAs. We have an ISEA chapter, and we have a School Administrators of Iowa chapter that works for administrators and such. But we provide quite a bit of professional development for teachers. About 5 years ago, the chief administrators for the AEAs came together and were looking to the future and saying that this concept of online learning for professional development has a lot of potential in the state. They didn't really quite know at the time how they would implement it, but one thing they wanted to do was to have a collaborative so that all the AEAs would work together. The advantage of it being that online professional development is one thing where geography isn't an issue. It can be delivered anywhere across the state. You can have a teacher that resides in Des Moines and can just as easily teach participants way out on both sides of the state, north, south, whatever the case may be. So that was the start of this collaborative called AEA PD Online. And we began operation in May of 2011, so we are about 2 years old. Iowa as a state is it's known as a rural state, of course. We have many idyllic farms and such. Many rural educators as well. And we're also a state with a proud educational tradition, and that cuts both ways. In some cases, there's a lot of pride that we take in professional development and such, and then in other cases, there is some resistance sometimes to breaking with tradition because of our traditional heritage. So online professional development has had kind of an interesting history being developed in the state. As we came around, we saw that there was still a lot of interest amongst educators for online PD for a variety of reasons. And especially in a rural state like Iowa, things such as getting professional development on demand, fitting in your schedule. We're a state that has a lot of sports and activities and coaching that happen year-round, and teachers are unable to really get away from those activities even in the summer to travel and such. And we have some situations where to come to a face-to-face professional development within an AEA would require a one-way trip of 80 to 90 miles. And People simply didn't want to do that for a 4-day class, driving 160 miles per day or something like that. So one of the big things that we did was we looked at the establishment of online courses as one of our formats for professional development. And these are courses that are very traditional in a format for PD. They come with an instructor. They're available for license renewal, which is a credit that a teacher needs to renew their teaching license in the state. They're also available for graduate credit. We have graduate credit providers, partners that we work with. And these have been very successful. We have a variety of different courses that we offer. We have some we consider statewide courses where we've got some content that we oversee, and then we go and recruit a cadre of teachers to go and teach those. We've also got some locally developed courses that our instructors have created that they provide. And then we even have some action research online courses where teachers are gathering themselves, and they're using the action research model of professional development where they're investigating a different implementation strategy, research-based practice, and they implement that into the classroom and they report back on their findings. And so with a variety of courses we've had, we offer over 300 courses per year, which is a testament to the need that there is within the state for that type of PD. Here's a screenshot of our system that we use. This is Iowa is a state that has a partnership with Google, and one of the things that we do, and part of that partnership, is we provide professional development. This is actually an older screenshot of our Google Apps 101 statewide course where we help instructors understand how to integrate the Google Apps into their classrooms. And this platform, by the way, is Moodle. It's one of the learning management systems out there that we use for, it's the one that we use for courses. Another item that we use, another format for PD, is what we call trainings. And a training is a self-paced, on-demand module. There is no instructor, and so the time requirement here is a lot less. For courses, we're required by code to have 15 hours of in-class instructional time and then additional out-of-class instructional time in order to award credit. Here for trainings, there is no set time usually. We do try to limit trainings to about an hour at the most, although we do have one training that currently lasts 2 hours. This is computer-based, computer-guided instruction. And this form of professional development has actually supersedes the AEA PD Online. We were actually delivering this through one AEA in the state, and since our collaborative came into being, we've turned around and are now offering this statewide. We just added a new training today, so we are now at 30 trainings. So it was our 30th training, and our newest training is on digital publication. In other words, how to create content for your iPad or other tablet or mobile device on a Macintosh computer. We look at 3 different ways to do that. We're coming out with our Windows version, which will be training number 31 in about 2 weeks. So here's a look at one of those. This is a training. This is a screenshot of me navigating through a lockout-tagout training. I guess you can see computer-based instruction and such. This helped tremendously when it was implemented. A lot of our mandatory items, mandatory child abuse reporting, it's one of the items need for licensure, all the OSHA requirements like bloodborne pathogens and things like that. We created trainings for so that districts didn't have to invest a lot of professional development time. AEAs and other entities didn't have to drive out to each district, and it made them for a much more flexible format. And we, since we just started, our goal is to ramp this up to offer 10 additional trainings each year. We're actually on pace to add 13 this year, so we're going to exceed that. We're now getting into the 2 new forms of professional development, and this is coming about because of our interaction with our rural educators and such. One of the things that we realized is that there is, from a PD provider standpoint, we tend to think of things as formal opportunities, and it's important to think of more both informal and non-formal. professional development opportunities. One layer of informal PD is what we call event style or event-based professional development. And this tends to be synchronous, which means people are gathering at the same time, even though they're gathering maybe over a distance. This is an example of an event-style webinar that we offer, and we offer through a product called AAPD Online Live. We then record these, and we have our recordings available for people who have missed those. So that includes things like webinars. It includes virtual roundtables. It includes things like interviews of individuals. In the state, we have a movement for working on communities of practice. So we interviewed Etienne Wegner from Harvard to talk about his research on that, and we used that. That was one of our live events that we've used. Recordings from face-to-face workshops and regional meetings, things like that. A whole variety of things that we're adding in there. So I guess I have a screenshot here. This is a screenshot from a training that I created a couple weeks ago. We actually had a snow day in May in Iowa a couple weeks ago, and I was unable to go to a training, so we to a superintendent's meeting. And so I created a live event with them. And we used a tool called Camtasia for that. There's many different tools. We use Adobe Captivate as another tool for some of our for items. And then in our webinars, we use Adobe Connect Pro. The fourth format, and this is one that we really see as the strongest connection with the ruralness of Iowa, is what we call the Agora. The Agora is a one-stop shop for online communities for Iowa teachers. And these communities are self-regulated. In other words, there is a core group to them. It isn't necessarily us running the communities. It could be a group of schools. It could be a statewide organization, a statewide group of teachers, content experts, whatever the case is. And they would gather a space for teachers who are passionate about this. We're talking about that community of practice model, where they would come and they would interact and they would exchange ideas. They'd have discussions, share resources, share lesson plans, share other ideas. And then each of these communities has an embedded calendar with it that connects to those live events. AAPD on Live and the Agora actually work in tandem with each other. If I go on here, this is a screenshot of our Agora. We have several resources that we use as part of that for educators. And then within that, here's an example of some of our communities that we offer. The analogy we use for this, one of the analogies is that in Iowa we have a lot of rural schools. And if you're, for example, a family consumer science teacher in your district, there's a good chance you're the only family consumer science teacher in your district. And this is a chance for family consumer science teachers to connect with other individuals. A lot of professional development that is delivered at the local level is generic in order to say, hey, how do we implement Common Core? How do we implement response to intervention, or these general concepts and initiatives within the state? And to get to more of a fine, detailed discussion specific to a specific curriculum, we need to extend the ability for educators to connect with other educators. We don't offer many formal courses for family consumer science just because it's hard to find instructors. So this is another way for them to gather and to discuss. There's a question in the chat pod from Aaron: are the Agora communities open or closed? Can anyone join the community, or is access limited? In general, our philosophy is that they're completely open. We do have the potential, although we don't have any communities right now doing this, that we could create a closed community that would be only open to certain members. If there's a membership-based organization in the state that wants to use this as a meeting place for their community, we would have the ability within our system to do that, but we don't currently have any of that, or have any like that. Our essential aim, though, is for individuals, and we're using the social the social learning model of learning, where you have different stages by which you go through. You have the lurkers, who then become a collaborator to a contributor to a core member, and there's a range of things. And the analogy we use here is that the agora, we picked the term the agora because it's the ancient Greek term for the marketplace, the meeting place where everybody came and met. It's kind of like our present-day shopping mall. We, from AAPD Online, we have created the virtual mall, and we allow different groups to set up the quote-unquote storefronts within that mall. We handle the larger issues, the advertising and marketing, let you know where the mall exists, and we handle the parking or password recovery issues, that type of thing. But individual communities go and then structure those communities how they'd like to. For example, in the screenshot, you'll see that we have a group for STEM. Iowa has a STEM initiative, and there's a group that's overseeing that called the STEM Council. And so if I click on theirs, this is a screenshot, they have a place where they describe what they do, and then down below they would have a place for discussion. They use a Twitter feed, so they have an embedded Twitter feed within there. There's other features, as you mentioned. There's databases where they share resources and an embedded calendar. So, and that's it. That's a quick look at the 4 different types. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have gone to the feedback survey quite yet, but that's the end of my presentation there. The 4 different formats we use are still in development. As I said, we've only been in existence for 2 years. There are things that we continue to build upon. We just have found that there's, despite a sense of being slow to change with some certain traditional elements that Iowa might have, educators are really interested and excited about online PD opportunities. The demand outpaces the supply, and so giving them this variety allows them to connect in ways that a face-to-face would not be as possible. A question down there, is the online PD for teachers in rural areas offered for a fee, or is it free? And if it's a fee, who pays, the district or the teacher? The courses that we offer, the online courses that are for licensed or graduate credit, there is a fee for that. They do pay for the credit. We do have options to, we do have options to audit the courses for free in many cases, but they would pay for that. The others, the training system, we added, 2 years ago, we added a feature where districts could administer their own trainings. And they could add their own trainings, they can pull up their own reports and such. And so we did start charging a fee to districts for accessing the trainer, for using the training system because of those other features and such. And that fee does help support our system. Otherwise, the live events in the Agora, there is no fee for those. People can come in and actively participate in those. All right. And if you have other questions in the chat pod, I will type answers. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to, should I just turn it over to Chris, or?
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks very much for offering that, Evan. And Simone, I believe, is still on the line as well. So if the participants have questions for Simone, please do feel free to ask them. Yeah, so after some delay and some technical issues, I'm very, very, very happy to introduce Dr. Chris Haskell. Chris, when you are ready, please take it away.
Well, excellent. Can everybody hear me okay? Let's do a double check before I launch into a diatribe that no one can recover from.
We can hear you in Chicago just fine.
Okay, good. As long as I can be heard in Chicago, that is the important part. Well, first of all, I apologize for breaking the system earlier with my face. That happens from time to time. I'll turn on the camera, and the ugly factor is so high that the system does not process it well. I hope that everyone who is with us is doing well and connected and engaged. And I'm going to talk about something that will either make you very happy or make you very unhappy. You can choose. That's the topic of gaming. It's a popular topic right now in a lot of ways. When we talk about education, you've probably seen some, read some, or maybe even engaged some yourself in that. What's interesting is that within our demographic as professionals, we're somewhere in the 72, according to Pew Research, 72% of us technically play games, but about 10% of us will admit that we play games because no one wants that interesting title on them. What I think is important to point out, and I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'll move quickly, is that we're going to see a dramatic change in our school approach, not just in the way that we teach in our schools and districts, but also in the way that we ourselves learn. And this is affected by the things that are happening in society. In fact, all educational change has been precipitated by major social change. And I'm not going to give you a long history lesson in all of the changes that have occurred in our, at least in our American educational paradigm. They're consistent across the other Western nations as well. And even though technically Eastern, I'm sorry, we consider Australia one of our friends, and therefore you must be Western even though you're Eastern. But we're not going to go into those details right now. But school is going to change more in the next 10 years than it has in the last 100. And the tools and the methods of interaction are going to lead that major change. And if we think about school and what's wrong with it, we can easily point to a few things that are not serving certain populations of students. That specific pacing and order either hold students back from the things that they're able to do or prevent other students from being as successful because they're being measured in time along with students who they may not be able to keep up with. And it doesn't have anything to do with intelligence, we're finding out. It has far more to do with schema, which just may be another fancy way of describing that. So really, what's wrong with the way professional development works? And I would offer this, that all classes, including our professional development classes, are a game, right? We try to figure out what it takes to win from the moment we engage in whatever that winning condition is for us, the way we prepare, the way we interact with others, attend, study, even talk with the teachers and professional development presenters is predicated on this idea of what we need to do to win or to reach whatever our satisfactory conclusion is. Not always what can I benefit the most from this environment? What can I take away and apply to my practice today? We look as a means to an end, whatever that winning condition is. Smart teachers and trainers try to slant it in the favor of learning, but we all ask the same basic question: what do I need to do to get out of this what I want, right? Rather than what's worth knowing, learning, experiencing. And we often will try to coerce participation with tests and quizzes and assignments and forced interactions and discussion boards. And often we'll chip away and punish folks with their own grades until mathematically it's impossible for them to be successful. And some think that there's really no rhyme or reason to it. It's just more random than anything. And it's one of the stupidest games I can think of, and people hate to play it. This idea of using grades to coerce interaction. And that's the game as it kind of currently exists. Now, you may be engaged in more authentic professional learning communities, and you can say, well, yes, okay, this is very different than what you're describing, Chris. And I'm thrilled to read your thoughts, because that's evidently what I'm doing is going to say. But the idea that this exists either within our own classrooms from time to time or in schools or in our own professional development experiences, that a game exists. So when we talk about gaming, that we're talking about applying game mechanics to an educational process, there's a game that already exists, and it looks somewhat like this. But if we look at other games, digital games, for example, we see that they work very differently than, say, a traditional educational model, right? They reward effort. They show progress. They allow us to level up and experience what it means to meet major benchmarks, and not just in letter grades, but in something more meaningful, sometimes a title, sometimes additional loot, if you will. Video games and other kind of games track progress in a very different way. They don't often compare us with other people. It's just our own experience. They allow learning through failure, which is rare in classroom experiences. For example, if you rush something and turn it in at the 11th hour and misspell a bunch of things, you'll often be punished with a lower grade, and you'll try to overcome that mistake throughout, rather than having it handed back to you and saying, oh, this is almost right, but give it one more proofread out loud, and you'll catch all the mistakes that I caught, and then submit it, and then receiving full credit, right? Video games do a great job of offering long and short-term goals and aims. They promote often socialization. And I think the most powerful thing is they allow for choice, not just token choice, but meaningful choice. Choice that can actually change your pathway within that. So if we look at the way games work fundamentally, they offer more effective forms of feedback through a complex system. That is not nearly as much fun as saying, now go off and play a video game, and we'll call that, air quotes, learning. But that's what they do. And so if we use these concepts, this premise, moving forward, the idea of game-based education hopefully will really sit differently with you. So why use game-based learning? Well, the first obvious piece is that our educational system is changing, right? We have and are at this rift between an industrial age school design and an information age school design. The wonderful tools that Simone talked about, and well, he's gone now. Where did he go? Our last presenter talked about, capitalize on the things that we know about the information age. First and foremost, we don't have to be in synchronous spaces to interact with one another. We can interact socially and in a very meaningful way using other asynchronous tools. Website. There was even a mention of using and leveraging, as Simone did this, leveraging the social networks like Facebook and those pieces to create interactions. But industrial age school design is one built on lockstep behavior. So we're putting everyone through the exact same industrial conditions and trying to achieve the same effect. It's a processing. It's think about it this way, it's a production line, it's a production cycle. But information age concepts and what we expect our students to be able to come out of school with, sense-making, transdisciplinarity, novel and adaptive thinking. I won't read all these, but collaboration, including virtual collaboration. We expect different things from our own experiences as well. So one of the reasons we talk about using games and game-based environments for professional development is because the feedback is more effective. And there's lots of research, and I'll kind of throw that at you here in just a second. And I pulled up a couple extras that I'll drop in the chat so you could link on these and do with them what you will. I will ask Lisa or Laura to make sure that I don't run past the time. I want to be respectful of the time that we have. So if you guys need to back channel me and light up your little back channel chat bar to tell me, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and so on, that'd be great. But the idea why use the game-based learning is because these are comfortable tools. There was a time when teaching did not occur with books. Books were too expensive. They were too hard to move into different places. Someone had to copy them, and not everyone knew how to read them. Eventually, the technology caught up, making those tools something that worked better in education. Now, say from scrolls. Eventually, think about this. Scrolls were a relatively low memory device, right, early on in the stages, but books could hold a lot more information. Well, games, in a very similar way, early on didn't make a lot of sense because they weren't ubiquitous. Not everybody could have access to them, and we didn't use them effectively. But now we can. So I want to talk about a couple of the ways that games are being used as professional development. And as I do, I will drop in some extra links to some research that is interesting. This idea of using game spaces for our learning environments is one that started about 8 years ago, more specifically, and it probably existed before then. But one of the most common is an outfit called ISTE, and you may be familiar with ISTE. I just dropped a couple links in there. The International Society for Technology and Education has been using Second Life and other virtual spaces, game spaces, if you will, as meeting locations, right? Allowing for synchronous discussion and interaction, engagement, bringing their communities together in a way that made them feel connected, even if they were in disparate locations. A good colleague and friend of mine, Wesley Fields, Simone, you may know Wesley. I can't remember his school name. He just changed jobs, I think. I'm not going to go into it. It doesn't matter. But he's our Australian colleague who's been working quite a bit in Second Life. And I can't remember the other organization. It'll come to me in just a moment when it doesn't matter. That are using these types of spaces to connect people who would not be able to connect easily through telephony by putting them in a richer space. And what are they doing in these spaces? Well, they're having conferences. They're presenting to one another. They're building actual virtual objects and locations that represent specific things. Mock trials take place. Exploratory building of historic landmarks so that students can interact with them and work inside them. Social experimentation. And allowing them to do that. I have a couple more links here. I'll just drop them, and hopefully we can, and you can, if necessary, you can search these. A couple other recent, relatively recent tools. Second Life is one of the most popular. A year ago, we started using a simpler tool than Second Life, which is an online social meeting space called Reaction Grid. It's actually built on a platform called Unity. You may know of Unity. Unity is a relatively simple to build game platform that allows you to publish basically your game space to an embedded web page. So you don't need to download a client or a specific tool. You can jump directly in. 8 more minutes. Okay. So I'll move through these. And we started using them at Boise State last year, not only to teach master's level classes, but also to use as spaces to bring in our teachers to present their materials. A close friend and colleague of mine, Dr. David Gibson, developed a tool called SimSchool. And SimSchool is a professional development tool for both pre-service and in-practice teachers in disparate locations to actually practice classroom management. Interacting with each of these virtual students and trying to identify their needs. Now, I am not very fond of factory rows. I think it's an antiquated paradigm that we need to move away from. But if you are locked into this teaching methodology, then there's no reason that a tool can't be placed in your path that would help you to be able to do that. I'm going to drop in some links to some research relative to SimSchool and using these types of games to teach specific practices. Just as a recap, one is not intended to be a learning tool, but we use it as a learning space. The other is designed to be a learning tool and can allow teachers to interact with needed tools. Another one that we have been using quite a bit lately, and there's even more research into Minecraft, both for students and for teachers, is this tool called Minecraft. And if you know Minecraft, if you have a 12-year-old, 12 to 22-year-old, there are, oops, I just typed those in the wrong one. I'm gonna drop them. I just gave them to Laura. Sorry. Let me give you these two. Okay, this is going to be a big one here. There's quite a bit in there. That using Minecraft as an educational space, again, a game space not developed for education, but you can bring multiple people in and you can build that space out to whatever you want. I'm also involved in 2 different guilds of gamer teachers. And the 2 different guilds are Cognitive Dissonance and Inevitable Betrayal, and they work exclusively in World of Warcraft. It is both a social and a professional learning network of those who are exploring different game spaces as professional development and meeting spaces, and basically repurposing those games. So it kind of comes to this broader concept of maybe our job as educators, as developers of professional development, is to loosen the restrictions on how people interact and help them apply context to what they're interacting with and what they're learning. And doing that, we can use some different methods. Now, there are basically two approaches being used right now in game-based learning. One is to take existing games and existing structures and place and use those games to teach. So using Portal to teach physics, using Angry Birds, again, to teach physics. Also, that includes our chocolate broccoli games, our Mavis Beacon typing tutor, and other games like that are designed to be educational. And the other way is to apply game-based mechanics in learning environments. At Boise State, we developed our own approach to this, which we called quest-based learning, and I'll introduce you to it because I've got some research on outcomes. We also use this quite a bit in professional development. We have 700 teachers in 10 countries engaged in professional development right now using our system, and we're using it primarily to test the approach. But it's a system that uses no homework, no due dates. Students have choice throughout. They play through a curriculum, and we do a better job of tracking what's going on. I'm not going to bash homework and due dates right now, except to say that we've found through our research and the research of others that these can be more problematic than they are helpful. They tend to structure teacher experience and interaction more than they effectively structure student interaction. That choice has an incredible power in moving students through curriculum, and actually choice makes these two, at times, obsolete and unnecessary. But what we do is we play class activities or quests, have experience points. They allow and reward multiple opportunities at failure. There are lots of pathways, and we define a winning condition. The difference, the comparison between a grade book, per se, and a quest-based approach looks like this diagram right here. The grade book is a singular path. Everyone moves down it at the same pace, where quest-based offers a flexible path. You accumulate points throughout until you have your winning condition, and we offer rewards along the way. Typically, curriculum is organized in the following way. There's a grouping of quests, many of which have prerequisites to one another so that they're scaffolded, and they end in a badge. You can either be given that curriculum with the rest of your classmates or colleagues, or you can self-select a curriculum that's unique to you and earn the badge or reward that signifies that you've completed that section. This is a picture of what the tool that we built looks like. It's in beta and it's available for use, but students select quests. They can see how many experience points they're worth, the average time of other users. Again, we're using those social network elements that Simone talked about, and user ratings. We can even see public comments left by students who have completed those different quests. Quests are either approved or returned. It's a one-column rubric in our quest-based approach, which is similar to Badge Stack and some other quest-based approach. Quest to Learn is an academy that uses this basic approach as well, and they're doing research with us, where it either gets approved because it meets everything that's needed, or it gets sent back because it needs a little bit more time. But either way, there's no punishment for that failure. Students are offered rewards, which they can go out and get, which represent different things, or they can choose to try to get everything, or they can choose to try to get ones that are just meaningful to them. Also, students always have their progress in front of them. There's that game-based feedback form again. They can see with progress bars how far they have to go to get to their next rank, or how far they have to go to, quote-unquote, win the class. We can also break down and see how they're doing in specific standards based on the quests that they've completed and the standards tagged to those quests. This number is a little bit out of date. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7,000 players right now, 700 teachers and their students. About a year and a half ago, we started doing some research into success rates within classrooms. Right now, 93% of students taking classes in, and this includes professional development as well, taking courses in quest-based learning as a delivery method are receiving the equivalent of their A's, and those measure against the A's that were achieved in a module-based course. And they're doing it about 20% faster than historical. So a 16-week course, we tend to see them completing in about 12.5 weeks, so maybe that's closer to 30%. An interesting phenomenon, this is one of the last pieces of the research that I've done, I'll share with you, is that because we don't punish students out of success, we have far more students achieve that winning condition. Beyond that, we notice that they tend to really push beyond the requirement. So if each of these red lines represents an individual student's progress through a course, in experience points, the white line is the winning condition. That's when they win the course. So they keep playing beyond their winning condition, which is a really odd thing. So you ask that, that tried and true researcher question, why are you still here? And we find what you would expect to find. Those at the very, very top, the super achievers as far as points, want to beat the snot out of the person next to them. They can't stand Becky, and she shouldn't be the high scorer. The ones in the middle often were just more curious. I just wanted to see what would happen if I got to 2,200 points. Or there was this activity I didn't feel like I could do before, but now, I could do it. If you're interested, you can contact me. We are bringing in a few more beta teachers. We're limited in how we can do that, and we're also, through Boise State, offering a professional development opportunity which teaches people how to convert their curriculum into a quest-based approach. Let me talk just briefly. Are there any of the games that are more user-friendly to non-tech-savvy teachers? Cataloged right now, there are about 187,000 digital games built within the last 10 years. And that number is so dramatic that we're having a very difficult time even categorizing how they're being used. Many of them are being used and not reported, and there is no organization large enough to really do that work. Clark Aldrich creates, and let me see if I can pull that up real quick. You can search it as well. Great colleague. He and I collaborate in the Serious Games Association. Clark Aldrich Designs. He's got a list. Tell you what, I'm just going to give you his website. You can find it from there. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let me try this one more time. He's got quite a few pieces. It all depends, and Laura, that's a great question, but it's a massive question. Because the question then boils down to, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to create an environment where people can come in and interact with whatever curriculum you've developed? If that's the case, then we're looking for those types of synchronous spaces that are easy to get to, that are maybe web-based. A tool like Cloud Party, which is built into Facebook. Again, it's a virtual space. You're welcome to check that out. It's a world that opens within a web browser. Easy to get to. You don't need specialized software to be able to do it, and it costs nothing unless you want to buy your own space. It all depends on what you want to do. As far as packaged professional development curriculum, haven't we as a community found that has limiting returns? First of all, that it may not be our ideology, it may not meet the needs of our constituency, it may not be exactly what we want, but yet we invest in this really well-developed tool just because it's a tool that's organized. If that's the case, most of the time those are constructed in modules because modules are easier to deliver rapidly to a group. There are other tools, and I mentioned a couple of them, BadgeStack, Quest to Learn. Any of those challenge-based or quest-based learning tools which allow you to plug in your own curriculum and allow people to kind of play through it and branch through it. The 3D Game Lab is another one of those, which we built at our university because we wanted one of those. No, in fact, it doesn't at all. That's a great question. Gambling or addictive behavior. There are a number of things that we assume to be true about games because they fit within, and I guess commonly accepted social beliefs about certain environments. Oh, if you're a gamer, that means then, that you're avoiding your children, you're hiding out in your room, and you're just, hanging out with your guildies. And that always happens. It doesn't matter what that is. That could be a video game or that could be a soccer club. Those types of behaviors exist equally across environments. Some environments make it a little bit easier for certain types of addictions. Computers have been shown, to make it more possible for certain types of addictions, but without those addictive characteristics in people, they don't exist. And I would encourage you to dig into Google Scholar. There's a lot of great places. I've got some research if you want to connect with me that kind of shows those as unique, I guess, beliefs that don't hold up when empirically evaluated. But that's a really interesting thing. Is social interaction more addictive in digital spaces than it is in face-to-face spaces? There's some research that talks specifically about that. What is the issue of this form of learning promoting a sedentary lifestyle? I would argue that it doesn't promote a more sedentary lifestyle. We're talking about, there's a broader issue, and you bring up a great point. One that sadly we don't have time to really chat about today, but I hope you'll reach out because it would be interesting to carry on the conversation, is that are we looking for the most effective ways to introduce, to deliver, to evaluate, and to enact a curriculum? Or are we looking for tools that are free of any criticism? Because I think that those are two very different rubrics that we apply to environments and approaches. And in doing so, we have to ask ourselves that broader question. What's the best way to teach this? What's the best way to engage this community? What's the most effective use of our time in professional development? Are we being conscientious and respectful of the lives that people live and trying to find effective ways to engage them in professional development in a way that does not make them sacrifice other parts of their lives? Is it a sedentary lifestyle to engage socially with your peers in a game space? Or is it more of a sedentary lifestyle to place yourself in a classroom for 4 hours a week away from your family? Is it, I think that those are broader issues that can't be answered in a tweet or a single idea.
Well, that's great, Chris, and that takes us up to 4:30. I do want to thank all our presenters from around the world. Thank you very much. This was, I think, some really good conversations started to get going. Just a reminder to all participants before we sign off, we will be sending up a follow-up email with a link to the archive of this event when it becomes available, as well as a short survey that we really would appreciate if you could complete. It's for our own internal and external reporting purposes. And with that, again, thanks very much. Apologies for the technical difficulties in the beginning, but we did get through it in the end. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a good afternoon or a good morning if you're in Australia.